Today we're going to be talking about the impulse machine, which is right behind me. This machine utilizes the inertial exercise. Units like this typically go for anywhere from $3,000 up to $4,000, depending on where you get them. This unit our clinic was able to get for free. This right here is the right setup of the impulse machine that does come with a left attachment. So as you can tell, it does take up quite a bit of space. So it's important to account for potentially having another piece of equipment just like this so that you could do both sides at once.
A couple of the quick main things about the system. You've got the handle here and the pulley can adjust up and down depending on what body part you're working with. And then we've got the sliding track that has loaded weight. During the exercise, when you're pulling on the string, it's going to be moving back and forth, which is going to be providing your resistance throughout the exercise. And it comes with several different weights. You've probably seen it most likely used for like shoulder internal and external rotation, this type of exercise. But you can actually, there's a strap that you can use. You just attach it on and you would lower the pulley down to the ground. And a strap that could be around your ankle to work on lower body exercises. And then there's also a baseball bat and a baseball ball, I guess just a baseball attachment that you can be used for like overhand throwing motions, which allows you to train on different aspects of the throwing motion that you can't really replicate with any other form of rehab equipment. So that's some of the benefits that we have for the impulse machine. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the form of energy that the impulse training system uses, which is the inertial energy. So it's based on Newton's third law of motion, which states that all motion, or every force has an equal and opposite reaction force. So, and with this impulse machine, the situation is the object sliding creates the inertia, which inertia is the property of mass to remain in motion. And we apply the impulse with the string of the cord, and then impulse is the force required to change the momentum of a moving object. So all human motion is a form of inertial exercise, which is why the impulse machine is a good rehab tool, because we are providing the impulse to the moving mass, and we can change the different locations that we're providing it at different angles to work on different muscles, and it applies to all forms of human motion.
So the basic principles of this impulse machine comes down to an acronym called STAR. So their big focus is STAR training. So the S of STAR stands for stance or posture. And what you will find is that stance is the most important aspect of the impulse and the inertial exercise. So what a good stance is going to do is it's going to govern balance, which in turn is going to help with a core stability. An important thing to notice for this is to keep your weight on the balls of your feet. That is going to help with your stance. Another special thing to know is to keep cervical, upper, and lower back in line, which will help increase posture. Our second of the STAR acronym is target. Targeting can only be accomplished with a proper stance. So again, coming back to that stance, it is the most important aspect of the STAR acronym. Something that we noticed that is interesting is the body must move while having an acquired target in space in order to have confidence in motion. So while you are doing these exercises, it's important to have that target in mind to know where you're going to bring the weight, in turn giving yourself a greater confidence of finishing the motion.
All right, so now that we've talked about the stance and the target, we're going to move on to the A, which is activation. So this is going to be when you're accelerating the sled, which would also be the concentric phase of the exercise. So in the example of like shoulder external rotation, when you're pulling out and accelerating the sled, you need to apply a proper amount of energy when you're pulling so that you're not, if you provide too much energy, you're going to be coming off balance, and if you're not pulling enough, the sled's not going to move and it's not going to be a fluid motion. So there's a bit of a learning curve. You're going to have to learn that proper amount of energy. The goal is to get about 2 repetitions per second. So that'll take a little bit of the timing mechanism too, figuring out 2 repetitions per second. The important thing is that when you're providing this concentric movement, you're not sacrificing your posture, so you still want to be in a good athletic position with the weight on the balls of your feet. If you do start to sacrifice your posture, you want to stop. You want to decrease the power that you're providing and finish the exercise with good form. For R, this is the release phase, which is going to be the eccentric, the lengthening, where you're slowing down the motion of the sled and getting ready for your next activation phase. So the release phase needs to be controlled, smooth motion of the tracking sled, and the goal is to have no slack in the line. So after you pull it, you're going to be eccentrically slowing it down, but if you slow down too fast, there's going to be slack in the line, and then there'll be a jolt at the end. And if you don't provide enough of the release, it's just going to keep traveling forward. This is where fatigue is going to first set in towards the end of your set. So you need to make sure, be mentally aware of that and be able to recognize when the fatigue starts setting in, that you're staying focused on the release, controlling the stopping of the sled. And then it's just a back and forth. You go activation, release, activation, release. So at the end of the release, you need to be preparing for your next activation. So the progression of using the impulse machine, you're going to start the patient using all of the weight that you have. So this is 17 pounds. The more weight that you have on the sled, the easier it's going to be for the patient to perform the movement. And then as you progress through the rehab plan, you're going to start, so say for an example, you do 2 sets of 10 repetitions. The next time that they come in to do their rehab, you're going to do 2 sets of 15 to 20 repetitions. And then the next time they come back in, you'll remove some of the weight, which makes the movement harder itself, but then you'll decrease the reps. So you'll do 2 by 10 again. And you'll progress through that of alternating, decreasing the weight or increasing the repetitions of each set. And that's how you would progress someone through their exercises.
An important thing to note, as always, is patient education. So as a clinician, it is our job to show the patient the exercise that they're going to be doing, informing them that pain shouldn't be present, that it should be difficult but not painful. So what you are going to do to start is demonstrate it for them, show them the motion that they're going to be doing. Next, on their healthy arm, they get to practice the motion, getting a feel for it, establishing that neuromuscular control, kind of learning that learning curve that we were talking about earlier, and then finally progressing into the injured arm, the one that we will be wanting to treat. So for our upper extremity demonstration, we are going to be focusing on a pitcher, for our example, who struggles with the internal rotation phase of pitching motion, feeling weakness, maybe some pain during that motion. So we're going to have them go through an internal rotation. So first thing that they are going to do is get into the proper pitching stance. And once they're in that stance, we make sure that, it's not being compromised by any power for strength or anything like that. So the second part would be targeting, so visualizing the internal rotation, that acceleration phase, so they can go ahead and go through that motion. And the important thing to notice about this is that there will always be tension in the line, focusing at a repetitions of about 2 per second. So as they go through that motion, noting that it's at 2 reps per second. As they go forward, you're going to notice the activation phase of the STAR acronym. So more of a concentric motion, accelerating towards that acceleration phase with internal rotation. Finally, ending with the release portion of the STAR acronym. This is going to be more of our eccentric work, bringing the motion back, and again, focusing towards that activation of the next phase. Again, it is important to keep posture in mind with this, not sacrificing posture for power. So you'll go ahead and demonstrate the motion.
All right, now we're going to show you how to do an exercise for the lower extremity. For this example, we're going to be working at someone that might be having some hip flexor pain, or maybe some quad tightness or soreness. So we're going to be pretending that Luke here is a soccer player that has pain during the kicking phase of his shooting form. So this is going to be used during like phase 2 of the rehab plan because he's going to be having to balance on his left foot while doing a dynamic functional movement with his right foot. So you need to have a little bit of strengthening and balance and coordination, and this is gonna tie it all together. So to get in the proper stance, Luke is gonna have to have his weight on his left foot, which is gonna be a stance leg, and then with his right leg, he's gonna be going into his kicking motion, which is the target when he's contracting or concentrically contracting forward. He's gonna be activating, and then he's gonna have to release by eccentrically controlling with his hamstring, slowing the weight down, and getting ready for the next activation cycle. So go ahead and demonstrate how that would be. Alright, so now we're going to be talking about some of the research that we found regarding the impulse machine. So this research done by Albert in 1994, the article was Muscle Torque Changes Caused by Inertial Exercise Training. He actually found that the impulse training machine had superior strength gains when compared to isokinetics, TheraBand, and free weights, which I thought was very interesting because we haven't really seen the impulse machine used very often here, and this was saying that they had superior strength gains compared to other forms of rehab. And they also showed that there's superior strength gains with the eccentric and concentric muscle contractions. This article, written by Pizzullo in 1995, the functional plyometric exercises for the throwing athlete, was looking at specifically baseball players with the overhead throwing motion. They found that there was no other device that was like this that could duplicate the functional angular velocities as seen during the pitching motion of baseball. And he said that it's a very practical application of inertial exercise relating to a throwing athlete. Lastly, Obuchi in 1997 wrote the kinetic and kinematic characteristics of plyometric exercises on the impulse machine for elbow flexors. He was looking at the EMG muscle activity during exercises using the impulse machine, and he found that there was extremely short duration of phasic impulse muscle contractions, meaning that there was like very little time between different muscles firing, and they were all like firing at the exact time in different angles and stuff to provide superior strength gains. And he also found that the angular velocity would reach up to 3,000 degrees per second, which no other device can replicate that, kind of going off of what Pizzullo found in 1995.
So some other research articles that we found on the inertial exercise trainer. The first one was titled Electromyographic Activity and Applied Load During Seated Quadriceps Exercises, published by Matheson in 2001. Similar to other articles published before this one compares the impulse machine to free weights, TheraBands, and isokinetics, your typical rehab strengthening tools. What made this one different than other articles published about this is that it tested the lower extremity rather than the upper extremity. So the way that they did this was through an EMG, and while also assessing muscle strength gains. And kind of the results that the researchers found through this study is that the impulse machine outperformed each and every one of those rehab aids, thus making it the best aid in rehab for strengthening. The second article that we found for this portion was Performance Evaluation of a High-Speed Inertial Exercise Trainer, published by Caruso in 2008. What this article kind of did was just give an overall assessment of the IET, and what they found was that movement should be done through a larger range of motion. They found this because multi-joint motions occur in more than one plane of motion. So a lot of the exercises that they did were multi-joint exercises that they performed in multiple planes of motion. So their kind of conclusion that they found was that the IET is effective. However, effective use of the equipment should be demonstrated to coaches and athletes to give them better patient education, because oftentimes the IET is a difficult rehab tool to use for the athlete. And finally, the last one that we have is musculoskeletal outcomes from chronic high-speed, high-impulse resistant exercises. This article was published in the International Journal of Sports Medicine in 2018, so a fairly new article, new research. What they found is that new bone formation needs a specific stimuli to develop. So what they did was they wanted to see if the IET was effective in developing new bone. So what they did was they assessed calcaneal mineral content, and what they found was that the inertial exercise trainers found an increase in peak force, acceleration, and actually increased bone mineral density of the calcaneus. So they found this to be a successful aid in increasing bone strength and developing new bone. Okay, and to end, we just have a few takeaways about the inertial exercise training. Number one is stance is key. This is probably the most important. We learned to not sacrifice stance or posture for power, and to always maintain stance throughout the entire exercise. Number two is the timing of contractions. So you want to go focus on those eccentric and concentric motions, making sure to get those 2 repetitions per minute. 3 is patient education. As we learned, there is a bit of a learning curve with this. It can be difficult to use this. The research shows that just patient education is important. And finally, the versatility. So as you can tell here, we have a number of exercises on this page talking about the versatility, just talking about shoulder motions, the different shoulder motions that we get. So as you can tell, there's a lot of different motions that we can do, and this just shows the versatility of it. We hope you like our presentation on the inertial exercise training, and that is all.